Right, welcome to the next Q&A with advisory panel members for the 2020 Digital Retail Innovations Report. And I'm pleased to say we have Olly Chubb. Welcome, Olly.
Hi, Glynn. Nice to see you. How are you?
And yeah, good, thank you. Good, thank you. Could you just tell us exactly who you are and a little bit, just your role, please?
Of course. So my name is Olly. I'm Strategy Director at Structure. We are a branding and design business, and we focus on helping high growth businesses basically develop smarter branding and more efficient digital solutions.
Great, thanks very much. Right, first question. What did you think were the most interesting themes from this year's report?
So I think for me, the most common themes remain the attempt to deliver a more personalized experience more quickly and more simply. And I think we saw that through many of the the top 10 and top 20, whether it was DNA Nudge in first place, and then sort of big players such as Amazon, Facebook and Walmart, all trying to, deliver more quickly in a more sort of tailored and bespoke way. I think beyond attempting to satisfy these ongoing consumer demands, the most interesting theme for me, and by interesting I mean encouraging, was the appearance of more sustainability focused solutions. So notably some innovations in the top 20 such as Ocado's Vertical Farms, Lost Stock, Mimica or Accor Hotels. And personally I gave Ocado's Vertical Farms the highest score because I think it perfectly harmonizes each of these themes to create something that's more beneficial for consumers, but it's also more efficient for the business. And I think this dual aspect is a really important signal that sustainability is no longer this kind of fringe, nice to have, but it's a much more mainstream, business savvy essential.
Yeah, I've been seeing in-farm as well, appearing in quite a few shops of late.
Yeah.
One of the areas which we've highlighted this year is the fact that the unmistakable impact of COVID-19. Some of the solutions we've seen in this year's report certainly reflected a need to solve problems around COVID-19, and it was interesting to see some of those solutions which had been operating in different areas were then adapted or pivoted, you could say, to supplying a solution to one or other of the problems around COVID-19. What's your view on that? And did you see that as been? It's interesting how some of those businesses had changed their solutions.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was, lots of people have sort of spoken about this and pointed to similar things. We've seen a lot of fringe behaviours and a sort of, innovations that maybe hadn't quite found the timing. This sort of change that we were seeing was really rapidly accelerated because it had to be. And I remember seeing a lot of brands, a lot of businesses kind of, scrambling out of necessity to find a way to pivot and remain relevant. And I think what was interesting in that is that, some businesses were able to adapt very, very quickly. I mean, we're actually looking at people like Leon and what they did in terms of, very quickly turning their sort of, restaurant into a more of a kind of supermarket sort of store. And again, having kind of apps to sort of connect people with things. And actually, I mean, one of the other sort of questions I know you were asking about is, which innovations really stood out. And one that I found really interesting was Uber Markets app. And again, I think that was an interesting example. It was obviously found real relevance through coronavirus and through the fact that people don't want to go out as much, and that when they go out, they want to really make it count. But it's built on an idea that I think has always existed. It remains a major frustration for consumers when they go out and visit a store and arrive there, only to be told that the store isn't carrying the item that they want, or the colour that they want, or the size that they want. And it's been a challenge that retailers have, they've been unable to fix it, or depending on your point of view, maybe unwilling to, if you believe that retailers are happy to continue frustrating consumers as long as it's underpinned by footfall. And I think, particularly what we're seeing now is that, this kind of age-old metric of footfall is being completely sort of turned on its head. And particularly with someone like Uber Market, was obviously able to tap into the fact that, not only do people feel frustrated when they go to a store and they don't have the item that they want, but now people don't want to take an unnecessary risk. And I think, it's even more vital for brands to be able to connect and empower consumers and make sure that every visit counts. So yeah, I think something like Uber Market was a really good example of, something that's probably existed for a while, has been used in a different way, and suddenly finds new meaning and new relevance because of this crazy situation we found ourselves in this year.
I think that's in Uber Market's case in the context of this report, that was where you'd have your shopping list on the app, wouldn't you? And then it would be able to look at the stock within the store you were due to visit, provided you've got the stock is in sync with the app, and you could then see whether they got them in stock or not. Hence, right, during COVID-19, some of those massively in-demand items, you'd be able to see at a glance whether they were in that outlet or not. And if not, then you wouldn't then join the queue outside the store.
Yeah. And exactly, I think, again, that idea that, unfortunately, obviously, what has happened is with coronavirus is the idea of kind of browsing. So we always had that kind of the idea of the sort of what I always used to call a kind of like a locate mission. So I know what I want, and I know where it is, and I just kind of want it. And increasingly, obviously, online services and e-com platforms are delivering that because they can deliver it. They can deliver it faster and they can deliver it cheaper, and that's really where obviously the likes of Amazon come in. But when you've got this more kind of sort of not necessarily whimsical, because kind of not quite as clear about what they're after type shopper, you want to wander around, you want to browse. But in the age of coronavirus, when depending on people's levels of anxiety or concern, or whether they need to shield, there's a real desire to not just wander around aimlessly and put yourself at risk. Something like Uber Market, I think, was really, really helpful. And again, it tapped into something that I remember, many years ago when I was a much, much younger man, doing a project about stock control in supermarkets, and it always seemed amazing to me that in the age of transparency, we can't find better ways to kind of connect into that, so you know exactly what stock someone is holding and whether it's worth your time going there.
Great, thanks, Olly. The other interesting thing, when you look at the top 10 and probably the top 20 and beyond, there's some really big names: Amazon, Ocado, Walmart, and Facebook. But also we've got many small providers, and I personally take this to be a healthy situation for both retail and innovation. What's your view in terms of how we've got this really broad mix of providers?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with you, Glynn. I think it's really healthy to see this mixture of kind of bigger names and smaller providers, and I think a lot of it is change creates huge opportunity, and it creates a huge need for new solutions. And as I said, this has been accelerated by coronavirus coming in, seemingly according to our government blindsiding everyone. And I think it's natural that many of the solutions that are being created are they're being developed by agile, inventive businesses who are, in many ways, they're focused on unlocking value in a very specific way. I think the real test is, how these innovations start to become embedded in our daily routines, how they start to form new habits, how they create kind of, instinctive sort of expectations that are going to inform the next evolution of these innovations. And that's why I think it's really important and it's really encouraging to see that there's this kind of ongoing sort of dialogue and relationship between larger brands and smaller brands, because it's really important to successfully translate some of these micro solutions into services that operate at scale and have much more kind of mainstream application and success. And often I think it's easy to look at some of the innovations and think, it's very hyper specific. You're targeting an incredibly kind of niche problem for a very niche audience. Where's the kind of sort of scalability aspect to it? And then when you start to see the likes of Amazon, Ocado, Walmart, and Facebook, sort of starting to adopt and adapt some of these, it's a really interesting dynamic. And I think it's really important to make these solutions more mainstream and more accessible to more people, because ultimately they're bringing benefits.
I think that's where the beauty of collaboration comes in, isn't it? You've got the agility and the coolness to some extent of the smaller operators, and then you've got the money and the customer base of the large organization.
I think as well, just sort of mixing one of the earlier questions as well, like I think something like one of the other kind of innovations I really admired was the Worley toy library. I think it was a good example. Like subscription models aren't new, but far too many businesses have just blindly sort of jumped on the model without thinking about why they're doing it or what the benefit of it is. And I think Worley was a really good example of how sometimes the smartest innovations can be as simple as combining the right model with the right market. And actually someone like, Worley, who are not necessarily a household name, are able to take something that has been adopted by the mainstream and actually find the right market for it. And kids' toys are, again, from a sustainability point of view, there's a huge amount of turnover there. There's a huge amount of waste. There's a huge amount of expense for parents. And again, I think that ability, not just for the kind of typical sort of big players to start to borrow or steal from the smaller players, but actually from the smaller players to start to sort of look back upwards and see what they can bring down. There's a really nice kind of interplay happening there. And again, I think it just benefits the end user ultimately, which is only a positive thing.
So just on that one, it's interesting that the toy subscription service you referenced there, it's sometimes you can think these things sit uneasily because they're so simple. You think, where's the sort of complexity and the technology in that? But then that's often something that's lost, isn't it? They become so complex that actually they're not really usable and they don't get any traction. So that is a great example of, it's very, very simple, but that's the beauty of it. It's simple.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's often the thing. People, one of the things I always talk about in terms of like a blended reality is that, whether it was, I remember use this example a lot, when Twitter first came out and people were like, oh, hey, like, we've launched a Twitter account that can do this. And I'm like, but why? You haven't thought about the purpose of it, and you haven't thought about the experience of why you're using it. And it's the same for all forms of technology and digital innovation. There's a whole spectrum of tools at our disposal now, and so many of them are really fantastic and make a huge difference. But I said, so many of them are they're wrong for the business. They're wrong for the brand. They're wrong for what you're trying to achieve, and being able to sort of unpick that. And as I said, Whirly is just a great example of, simple application. It understands how to deliver a really smart and a really enjoyable experience, and it just makes sense. Another one actually that was good in terms of a sort of a pivot, I thought, was Zkit and ASOS. I thought that was a really smart pivot, obviously born out of necessity with coronavirus in terms of not being able to maybe do photo shoots. But again, it's one that was, it opened up this different way of thinking, and suddenly a new way of working was demonstrated that it's got, far-reaching commercial application beyond the specific circumstance it was created in. So again, I think, being smart enough to be able to take a step back, get some perspective, and understand how to sort of develop really, efficient, really effective, really kind of smart solutions. Those are what I think we've sort of seen in, businesses that have really sort of come to the fore. And you mentioned earlier with, InFarm and M&S, for example. I think some of the stuff that M&S has been doing with InFarm and in store is really fantastic. I think where Ocado had this enormous kind of advantage is that they've really understood how to connect it to a much more kind of sort of B2B and kind of real sort of business effectiveness argument as well. So, Heinemann and other people in Europe have been having these sort of vertical farms and herb gardens for a little while now, and it's really a lovely thing for consumers to be able to get their hands on. But again, taking it to that next level in terms of where you can return value on both sides of the equation, I think that's really, really interesting aspect as well.